Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. I'm Rylan, and this is the top 15 horror comedy movies of all time. There are two genres of entertainment that specifically target your stomach muscles, but in very different ways. Horror makes your stomach churn with, well, horror, jump scares, gory deaths, and sheer terror of uncertainty. Some of the best horror films in the history of filmmaking have been, quite literally, gut-wrenching. You're telling us that your gut didn't involuntarily clench itself when Jack Nicholson knocked down that door with the axe in The Shining? Or how about the exorcism scene from The Exorcist? How about the eponymous scene in Jordan Peele's tantalizing tale, Get Out? We rest our case. Comedy, on the other hand, knocks the wind out of your stomach with sheer hilarity. Whether it's satire, slapstick, insult comedy, or something else entirely, comedies often use targeted humor to create scenarios that draw peals of laughter from the audience. But if you think about it, horror films and comedies are really just two sides of the same coin. The mounting tension and precise comedic or horrific timing, building to the ultimate payoff. In a horror movie, that payoff elucidates screams, winces, and a general sense of mass hysteria. In a comedy, on the other hand, the payoff is laughter. In a good horror comedy, however, it's both. A cringe-inducing amalgamation of an unnerving chain of events that are equally heinous and hilarious. And the best horror comedies play with their audiences like a fiddle, layering shocking brutality with a rib that is too funny to ignore. So, in this video, we'll take a look at the top 15 horror comedies and what makes them so damn addictive to watch. Before we get into today's explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thanks. Now, let's begin, shall we? Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, 2010. This movie takes the premise of a slasher film and completely flips it on its head by switching the roles of the psychopathic killer and his victim. The eponymous Tucker and Dale are an affable duo of gentle, kind-hearted hillbillies who have just acquired their dream home, a cabin in the woods by the lake. They're heading over to this property when they meet a group of teenagers who are heading to the same area for a camping trip. Tucker feels an instant attraction towards Allison, but his social awkwardness drives the group away. Tucker and Dale remain undeterred and start working on their cabin, which turns out to be a desert heap of rotten wood and bones. Meanwhile, Chad, the teenager group's leader, tells his friends the story of the Memorial Day Massacre, a hillbilly attack on their town 20 years ago that took his own father's life, allegedly. Later, when the group is swimming in the lake, Allison almost drowns, and Tucker and Dale save her, but her friends think she's being kidnapped. With Chad's clear antagonism towards the hillbillies, it doesn't take long for them to chase after the perceived kidnappers. What unfolds next is a series of hilariously tragic and unfortunate accidents, where most of Allison's group dies because of their own carelessness. Chad is revealed to be an unhinged hillbilly-hating psychopath who tries to kill Tucker and Dale and fails miserably. Allison falls for the kind-hearted, well-meaning hillbilly, and Dale finally overcomes his social anxiety as the movie rolls to credits. What makes this movie so endearing is the fact that it toes the line between slasher gore and slapstick comedy with borderline perfection. Tucker and Dale aren't unhinged, cabin-dwelling psychopaths. They're just regular folks with regular lives and issues. Seeing things from this perspective of the perpetual antagonist works wonders for the movie's comedic timing, which is extremely on point, we might add. The moment we saw Dale trying to talk to the group with a scythe-like Grim Reaper-esque tool, we knew where this film was going to go, and it only kept building from there. Miscommunication and the fear of the unfamiliar drive this story. The kids just assume that Tucker and Dale are horrific people and set out on a quest for survival, like the premise of every slasher film ever. But at its core, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is a buddy comedy with a fairy tale ending. Dale's social anxiety and Tucker's genuine friendship are at the heart of this film, and their interplay creates some of its best moments. Allison's trust for our duo is heartwarming, and Chad's implosion was just as hilarious as his downfall. Like every good slapstick film, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil has its fair share of gore. Unfortunate impaling, miscalculated immolation, one of the best tributes to Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face, and of course, the wood chipper scene. This movie doesn't try to oversell the violence to make the comedy work. It perfectly times its jokes to make the violence work. From the suicide pact realization to the iconic "we're having a doozy of a day" speech, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil is a queasy, heartwarming spin on the hillbilly in the forest trope that should definitely be on your list.
I am mine.
Army of Darkness, 1992. Sam Raimi's cult hit Evil Dead series' third installment sees Ash Williams transported to the Middle Ages. Army of Darkness starts off with Ash as a prisoner, recounting his tale to the audience. He doesn't know how he ended up there, but he's gonna find a way out. Ash and Duke Henry reach Lord Arthur's castle in chains. The Duke is Arthur's enemy, but they just await his justice. Ash's boomstick and chainsaw are taken away from him, and he's flung into a pit to be tortured to death. But he encounters Deadites in the pit, and after defeating them, he's accepted by Arthur's people as a hero. Ash spends his days living lavishly and courts Sheila, the sister of a fallen soldier. When time comes for him to return to his world, he's tasked with recovering the Necronomicon, which is the only thing that can help him. Of course, he botches it, and let loose an army of the dead upon the world, led by an evil doppelganger of Ash himself. After an elaborate, rib-tickling battle sequence, and we mean that literally, Ash saves Sheila, forges peace between Arthur and Henry, and returns to his own timeline. The movie ends where we see Ash telling this story to a colleague of his at a department store. As usual, the colleague doesn't believe a word of what he's saying. A Deadite soon attacks Ash just in time to confirm his story, and after dealing with the dastardly being, he signs off with the iconic one-liner, "Hail to the king, baby."
Hail to the king, baby.
Army of Darkness is less horror, more comedy, but in the best possible way. Sam Raimi tuned Ash's hammy personality up to 11 for this one, but Bruce Campbell knocked it out of the park. The man-out-of-time trope creates genuine entertainment value, as Ash bursts out insults that probably haven't even been invented yet, and keeps quoting one-liners like a self-obsessed, testosterone-driven Rodney Dangerfield. We'll admit that the plot is threadbare, but the movie more than makes up for it with its gags. Army of Darkness is, for all intents and purposes, an insult comedy dressed up in a Halloween costume. Ash's buffoonery has been amplified by his ego. That is the perfect recipe for a series of delightful disasters. From the Gulliver's Travels-inspired scene with the mini Ashes to the creation of the Jim Carrey-esque Bad Ash, this movie heads towards its climax like a roller coaster on steroids. Our favorite thing, though, has to be the Skeleton Army. Their stop-start movements, the fact that they bring era-accurate drummers and flautists to the battlefield, the fight montage with Ash at the Necronomicon's location, it is just a silly comedy executed with uncanny brilliance. Campbell's commitment to Ash's misplaced sense of coolness creates some genuinely badass moments. And overall, the film is a treat to watch, and a testament to Raimi's pioneering contributions to horror comedies.
Please come down.
Ghostbusters, 1984. When ghosts start haunting New York City and evil demon gods approach, it begs the question, who are you gonna call? Parapsychologists Peter Venkman, Raymond Stantz, and Egon Spengler have more than a passing interest in the paranormal. They believe ghosts are real beings and are determined to prove that they are correct. However, an encounter with a monstrous ghost at the New York Public Library leads to them losing their jobs, and our trio of misfits decides to fight them for a living. Now called the Ghostbusters, they hire a fourth member, operate out of a disused, rundown firehouse, and develop advanced and quite bizarre technology to combat their ectoplasmic foes. The Ghostbusters' real trial arrives in the form of Zool and Vinz, demigods and spirit entities that threaten to unleash a terrible evil on Earth from a different dimension. They target the Busters' friends as their vessels, possessing them and attempting to perform some kind of a ritual, but the Ghostbusters manage to keep them apart. However, things go awry when EPA lawyer Walter Peck visits our dynamic quartet and accidentally sets all the captured ghosts free. As a result, Vince is able to catch up with Zool, and they summon their leader, Gozer the Gozerian, who starts destroying New York City. It's up to the Ghostbusters to save the world from this supernatural threat. Ghostbusters is an affable car crash of a movie that throws everything at the wall and just hopes it sticks. Blending elements of horror, mysticism, and comedy, Ghostbusters uses just the right amount of crap science to sell itself without being taken too seriously. And while the ghosts themselves are hilariously designed, the entire film rides on the shoulders of the excellent improvisational comedy. The stellar cast of SNL graduated comics on set managed to improvise almost every joke, dialogue, and punchline that made it into the final film.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass. Did you see it?
From Spengler's defense for trying to drill a hole into Venkman's head, that would have worked if he hadn't stopped me, to almost all of Venkman's quips. Nice shooting, Tex. Every hard-hitting joke in this movie draws you in and punches you in the gut with its hilarity, And who can forget the moment when Gozer the Gozerian finally emerged? The non-stop barrage of laughter elicited by this god of destruction as it lays waste to New York in the form of a giant Stay Puft Marshmallow mascot is ingrained in our memory. From start to end, Ghostbusters plays like a hilarious fever-induced dream, with one of the best theme songs of any franchise ever.
Don't even think about it, you little son of a bitch.
Night of the Creeps, 1986. While traveling in their spaceship, a scuffle breaks out between three aliens who drop a canister from their vessel that crashes on Earth, circa 1959. A couple encounters this canister, but an escaped maniacal criminal attacks them, killing the girl. The boy tries to deal with the man, but a creature enters his mouth, leaving his fate uncertain. Flash forward 27 years, and we encounter Chris and his friend JC. Chris is pining over Cynthia, peer of his from the Corman University, and joins a fraternity in an attempt to win her heart. The leader tasks them with stealing a corpse and dumping it on rival territory, but the plan goes awry when the dead body wakes up and attacks the duo, causing them to flee. Detective Cameron is called on the scene, and he soon realizes that there is a connection between the missing cadaver and his own past. The girl at the start of the film is his ex, and the corpse that fled the university's medical center was her boyfriend. He comes back to the frat house for his date, except now he's a zombie that's being controlled by alien slugs. With time running out, Detective Cameron, Chris, Cynthia, and JC face this alien threat while neutralizing zombified humans and coming up with a scheme to put a permanent end to it all. At the end of the movie, Cameron sacrifices his life to protect the children, but it's revealed that the slugs have zombified him as well. They escape from his body and enter the cemetery, seemingly planning their next move. We're going to say this up front. Night of the Creeps is a slapdash mess of a film. From the trope-riddled script to the costume designs for the zombies and aliens that looked worse than a dollar store mascot, everything about this project screams B-movie. And that is all part of the plan. Director Fred Decker tried to incorporate every B-movie trope imaginable to create this epic hybrid of horror, science fiction, romance, and comedy with a touch of slasher gore for good measure. The movie is cheesy, we'll admit that. The outfits, the fraternity theme, the paranoia of alien invasions, everything about this movie embodies the spirit of the 80s with unabashed pride. It even manages to pull off nuanced comedy. In one scene, a zombie walks out of the university medical center and passes by a cop who, without looking up, says, "I'll see you tomorrow." But the real reason this mess works is Tom Atkins. Atkins' Detective Cameron is a weathered veteran with a penchant for one-liners and a cigarette stuck to his lips. Atkins' sheer charisma and delivery makes you believe in everything that Cameron says, and he has some of the best one-liners in the entire movie. We imagine a young MC Hammer taking notes when Cameron proclaims, "Duck, it's Miller time," right after informing some girls that he has some good news and bad news. The good news was that the dates had arrived. The bad news was, well, that they're all dead. The other thing it had going were the slugs themselves. Now we know that as far as originality goes, Decker's slugs aren't exactly top-notch. What they are is creepy, and that itself breeds horror. A combination of sounds, well-timed special effects, and sheer creature design will make your stomach churn every time they pop up on screen. They make you want to duct tape your mouth shut too. Night of the Creeps delivers exactly what it promises. A B-movie with quality humor, well-timed jump scares, and terrific acting from the cast, which makes it well worth the 88-minute runtime. Gremlins, 1984. 1984 was kind of a golden year for horror comedy. Not only did we meet the Ghostbusters, but we also befriended the Gremlins. Randall Peltzer, loving father and failing inventor, visits an antique store in Chinatown, looking for a present for his son Billy. There, he encounters a mysterious creature called a mogwai. Randall wants to buy it for Billy, but the store owner refuses. After a series of events, Randall gets the creature and is given 3 commandments for taking care of it. Never expose it to sunlight, never let it touch water, and most importantly, never, ever feed it after midnight. Randall named the affable furry creature Gizmo, and Billy quickly takes to him. One day, however, Billy's friend Pete accidentally spills water on Gizmo, who spawns more creatures like it, baffling them both.
I don't know.
Unlike Gizmo, these mogwai are rambunctious and cause all kinds of trouble. The boys turn to their science teacher, Mr. Hansen, looking for answers, but Hansen's merely interested in experimenting on the creature and finding out more about its true nature. Gizmo's new, mischievous roommates, meanwhile, trick Billy into feeding them after midnight, which leads to them creating a cocoon around themselves and hatching into evil, green-fleshed reptilian gremlins that attack Billy's mother and torture Gizmo. Mr. Hansen's gremlin attacks and kills him as well, in a rather violent fashion. Billy and his mom manage to kill most of the gremlins, terrorizing their home, but their leader, Spike, escapes. He jumps into a swimming pool, releasing dozens of gremlins who attack Kingston Falls on Christmas Eve. Billy and his girlfriend Kate manage to corner them in the movie theater and blow most of them up in a massive explosion. Billy and Gizmo take down Spike by exposing him to sunlight, which makes him explode in a hail of oozing slime. The final moments see Billy handing over Gizmo to the antique store owner, who tells him that he can come back for Gizmo when he's ready. From the moment we learn about the 3 rules of raising the Mogwai, we know that at some point they're gonna be broken. And yet, Gremlin lures you in with that ominous sense of something evil coming out of this cute little furball of furry warmth that we know as Gizmo. This movie does a great job of building tension and puts many modern slasher films to shame based on the action alone. While the Gremlins are goofy, make no mistake, they are lethal. These gluttonous little reptilian miscreants have a sizable appetite for candy and blood. They're hyperactive, brutal, and always looking to create as much mayhem as possible. They seem to have a sick, twisted sense of humor as well. Case in point, Mrs. Deagle's comeuppance. When she answers the doorbell, she sees a bunch of gremlins caroling at her porch, who then proceed to kill her by causing a malfunction in her chair that comically flings her out the window. From the moment we see Randall step into the antique store, we get this juvenile sense of doom that permeates the movie's runtime and makes for a gripping watch. The cast puts in a great performance as well. Special props to Frances McCain for looking like a woman on an absolute mission in that kitchen scene. Hoyt Axton's take on the failing inventor Randall emanates warmth and a lovable dad energy throughout, and makes sense as he ad-libbed most of his lines. Bonus performances by Jonathan Banks and comedy legend Howie Mandel, who voices Gizmo, tie up Gremlins with a neat little bow that says, classic. It's the perfect choice for those of you who like your Christmases with a side of laughter and gore. Scream, 1996. What's your favorite scary movie? This iconic line from the opening phone call sets the tone for the rest of the film. Casey Becker gets a phone call from a stranger who flirts with her on the basis of their shared love for horror films, but the call soon turns into a deadly trivia game. If Casey gets a question wrong, her boyfriend dies. If she gets another one wrong, she dies.
Warm-up question.
Don't do this, I can't.
Name the killer in Halloween.
No.
A ghost-masked killer violently murders the couple and puts their bodies on display for the whole town. As reporter Gail Weathers investigates the case, Sydney Prescott prepares herself for her mother's death anniversary. She gets a call from the killer as well, but manages to escape him just as her boyfriend Billy enters the room. Thinking Billy was the one who made the call, she gets him arrested and spends the night with her friend Tatum, when they get another ominous phone call. Sydney's friends throw a party at Tatum's house to celebrate school being closed down on account of the killings, and everyone gets together to watch a horror film. Amongst the attenders are Gail and Tatum's brother, Deputy Sheriff Dewey Riley, who are chasing the killer. Ghostface strikes at the party, killing Tatum. Sydney's friends leave the party after they discover that the principal has also been murdered, which leaves Sydney, Billy, Randy, Stu, and Gail's cameraman Kenny at the house. Ghostface soon strikes again, killing Kenny and going after Sydney. What ensues is a race against time, where Dewey and Gail must figure out the killer's identity before he gets to Sydney. The climactic action sequence reveals that Billy and Stu had been playing Ghostface this entire time. They were the ones behind the killing spree, and it was Billy who killed Sydney's mom. With Gail's assistance, Sydney overcomes her attackers and puts an end to Ghostface once and for all. This movie ends with an impromptu news report on the events that transpired the previous night. The moment they killed off Drew Barrymore's character in the first scene of the film, we knew that this movie was going to be special. Scream is the original Inception, in that it deconstructed the horror genre so precisely that it became a horror film within a horror film, complete with an in-universe adaptation of the film's events in sequels called Stab. For all intents and purposes, it is a parody of the entire genre. The main character was very aware of all the taboos of a horror film, and actively takes measures to avoid them. They basically expose every trope of the genre. Alcohol and drugs lead to death, sex is a bloody affair, and everyone who says, "I'll be right back," is basically guaranteed to die. And that isn't even where the parody stops. Even the deaths are a mockery of the gruesome slasher genre. Tatum's especially. Imagine being crushed to death while stuck in a dog door. But that self-awareness lends itself to the tension of the film, which builds perfectly as a comedy-tinged gorefest. Ghostface's disturbing mask is contrasted by his abhorring clumsiness. What kind of self-respecting serial killer keeps getting knocked down by refrigerator doors? And that is where the true hilarity of Scream lies. The constant breaking of the fourth wall creates an atmosphere of the known unknown that instantly devolves into a crazed lunacy, and we eat up every second of it. The cast puts in immaculate performances as well, especially Courtney Cox, whose Gail Weathers is a far cry from the loving Monica Geller. Weathers is a capital B word, and her presence in the film is a blessing for both the plot and the actress herself. David Arquette's affable goofball take on Deputy Sheriff Dewey Riley breaks the tension with an easy charm that he has yet to recreate. Overall, Scream is a laughter-filled gore fest that single-handedly revived the 90s slasher industry. You should give it a watch for that alone. Zombieland, 2009. Welcome to the United States of Zombieland. A mutated strain of mad cow disease evolves into a zombie virus that rapidly spreads across the US. Teenage zombie apocalypse survivor Columbus is traveling across the US to check on his parents and find out whether they've succumbed to the zombie virus or not. On his way, he encounters the eccentric zombie hunter Tallahassee, who has a penchant for violence, alcohol, and is addicted to Twinkies. They form a reluctant partnership and start traveling together. On their journey, they encounter Wichita and Little Rock, con artists who swindle them out of their weapons and vehicle. Columbus and Tallahassee give chase, and after a brief altercation, the four of them form an uneasy alliance. Columbus also relentlessly pursues Wichita, but she isn't having any of it. The sisters reveal that they're traveling to Pacific Playland Amusement Park in Los Angeles, an area supposedly free from zombies. When the group arrives in LA, they go to Bill Murray's mansion and discover that the superstar is still alive. He disguises himself as a zombie to freely roam around the streets and starts watching Ghostbusters with Little Rock when Columbus shoots him in the head, mistaking him for a zombie.
Is that how you say hello? Where you come from?
The quartet splits apart when Wichita and Columbus get closer because of one of the rules of survival in this world: no attachment. The sisters travel to the Pacific Playland and start all the rides, attracting hordes of bloodthirsty zombies. They prepare for their final stand when Columbus and Tallahassee arrive, who manage to save the day. As Wichita and Columbus confront their feelings, they leave Pacific Playland together. The movie ends by reaffirming the need for human attachment, because otherwise, we're all just zombies. This film is 88 minutes of action-packed, gore-filled, punchline-driven humor that never lets up. We're introduced to Zombieland as a zombie burps into a camera, and Jesse Eisenberg's chittery voice introduces us to the rules for surviving this world. In the opening scene, we see 4. By the time the movie ends, the list has grown to 33, and most of them are absurd. But if you really think about it, they end up making sense in their own twisted ways. Why is cardio rule number 1? Because if you can't outrun them, you'll end up joining them. Beware of bathrooms, because these zombies aren't very smart. They'll corner you when you're at the most vulnerable. And for goodness sake, double tap your victims. Conserving bullets will only get you closer to death. This running gag threads the plot and humor devices of the movie together into a compact package of impactful hilarity. Jesse Eisenberg and Emma Stone play their parts to a T, their nervous energy and nerdy romance lying at the center of the film's story. While the story was theirs, the screen was Woody Harrelson's. His unhinged take on Tallahassee has to be some of the best comedy work of his career. That attractive southern drawl, the Magic Mike-inspired costumes, and the perpetual search for calorific Twinkies are extreme personality depictions, yet he somehow pulls it off with such finesse. You believe that he is Tallahassee, and the brilliant cameo by comedy legend Bill Murray serves as a meta reminder of the culture-bending effects of horror comedy. Zombieland is a love story, a buddy comedy, and a gory slasher film at the same time that manages to tick each box without a scrap of fat on the entire production. From start to finish, The twists, turns, and wisecracking quips keep you gripped to your seat, rooting for the loner and cheering for the weird zombie-hunting cowboy every time he cocks his shotgun. His mother will be proud of him indeed.
Gotta be something.
The Cabin in the Woods, 2011. The movie begins with a long, esoteric opening card that depicts horrific scenes. Immolation, violence, gluttony, lust are all in full display. It immediately transitions to regular office gossip between two colleagues who are discussing a seemingly scientific ritual and the failure of one such ritual in Stockholm. After moving away from this conversation, we meet our cast of misfits. Kurt, Marty, Holden, Jules, and Dana. They've decided to spend their weekend at Kurt's cousin's cabin in the woods. On their way to the cabin, they're warned by Mordecai, the creepy-looking owner of the gas station, about the cabin and its supernatural nature. The group brushes him off and goes there anyway. Once they reach the cabin, odd things start to happen. The colleagues from the opening sequence, Gary and Steve, start manipulating the environment of the cabin to induce a series of horror-inspired events, lead to most of the group dying. Only Dana and Marty survive, discovering a secret, the secret underground lab, and the true purpose of its existence. Having had this revelation, the dynamic duo tries to save the world from its own grief, and ends up causing the destruction of the lab, the cabin, and possibly the world itself. From its name to its execution, The Cabin in the Woods is a thorough, merciless, and utterly hilarious deconstruction of horror and slasher tropes, and that is what makes it such a wild watch. Everything about this movie is backwards. Kurt is supposed to clearly fit the athletic trope, but has terrible aim and prefers Russian philosophy to football. Marty is the stoner comic relief, but he's the one who actually loves the mystery of the cabin. He had been acting dumb the whole time. Jules is dressed evocatively, and is clearly meant to be the promiscuous one in the group, and yet she's in a loving, committed relationship with Kurt. The ensuing cognitive dissonance is fertile ground for humor. In one scene, Kurt clearly rules out splitting up as a dumb decision, so the secret lab releases a mind-altering drug into the cabin, causes Kurt to suggest splitting up. The entire foggy, mysteriously seductive aura of the cabin is a play on the glum environment of such films, and their unnecessarily sexualized tones. Of course, this is egged on by the nature of the secret project. Gary and Steve's affable office humor and chemistry is undercut with a sense of doom when they unveil their whiteboard containing the list of every monster that they've captured. This list is Whedon and Goddard's tribute to every horror film ever. No, seriously. Go through it. The pair has packed every minute of this film with dialogue, motion pieces, and actions that pay tribute to every impactful horror film of every era, from The Shining to Hellraiser. Heck, they straight up imported most of their monsters and let them loose on the titular cabin in a sick, twisted game of human sacrifice. Special props to Bradley Whitford's jittery, chatty, self-assured portrayal of Steve Hadley. Easily one of the best performances we have seen from him, period. And yes, that includes being Jake Peralta's dad. The Cabin in the Woods does its job as a satirical comedy about horror, and does it phenomenally. If you're the kind of person who likes to ponder on every fabric of reality and horror's place in it, while casually laughing at the boneheaded decisions some of the characters make, this is just the movie for you.
And hold it there. Yeah, just get her up, mate!
Shaun of the Dead, 2004. The mundane life of perpetual loser and electronic salesman Shaun comes to a standstill when it crumbles all around him. His colleagues and stepfather hate him, his girlfriend dumps him, and his dead-end job isn't getting him anywhere. Dejected, he goes on a night of drinking with his best mate Ed. They hit up their favorite bar and pass out after drinks, waking up with wicked hangovers. What they don't realize is that the entirety of London is going through a zombie apocalypse. Shaun encounters zombies in the streets and mistakes them for regular people. It's only after they come across a pair of zombies actively trying to attack them that they are convinced that there is any threat.
Which one do you want, Colonel Bloke? The first one.
Shaun and Ed embark on a quest to protect his mother and ex-girlfriend from the zombie horde. Along the way, they encounter various survivors who are related to their lives in some way, shape, or form. Shaun's mother gets bitten by a zombie and has to be mercy killed by her own son. The gang of misfits seeks shelter in a local watering hole, preparing for their last stand. They're attacked by a swarm of zombies who kill David and Diane, biting Ed in the process. Just as our trio of unlikely heroes are about to meet their fate at the hands of the zombies, the British Army arrives and decimates them, returning London to normalcy within 6 months. Shaun and Liz get back together, and it's revealed that Shaun kept the zombified Ed in his shed to be able to still play video games with his best friend.
Is there another way in?
Well, yeah, there's...
2 seconds.
Shaun of the Dead uses the premise of a zombie apocalypse to show its audience the true horror of life: monotony. Going through the motions is the true terror. And if you're lucky enough to see a stand-up comic performing in Britain, they'll let you know that the first chance they get. British humor is dark. It's dry, sarcastic, and tonally dull. Its impact falls flat for the uninitiated ear, and cannot be resisted by those who have experienced it. Shaun of the Dead is, in our opinion, peak British humor. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost's infectious energy and effortless chemistry makes this movie a lot more believable than it should be. Pegg's Shaun epitomizes the dejected middle-class Briton, utterly lifeless in his pursuit of life, to the point where he doesn't realize that the man he just crossed on the street and the woman in the backyard are actually undead. The first zombie attack, our affable duo faces, draws out raucous laughter. If you want to harm a zombie, use expensive limited edition vinyl records and cricket bats, because nothing else seems to work. As the movie progresses, a combination of wry wit and social humor sees the duo coast through one tough situation to the other, without skipping a single beat. Our favorite scene has to be the one at the Winchester bar. Because of a triple team assault on an undead zombie, with Don't Stop Me Now as its soundtrack doesn't make you lose your head with laughter, and you might as well be bitten by a zombie yourself. Everything about this movie, from its breakneck pacing to its dry and sardonic humor, to the inspired performances put in by the cast, it's pure comedic perfection. An American Werewolf in London, 1981. This Oscar-winning classic is perhaps the most important horror and werewolf film of all time. David and Jack, backpackers from New York City, make their way to the United Kingdom on a trekking trip, intending to cross the moors of Yorkshire. They stop at a local bar called the Slaughtered Lamb and strike up a conversation with some patrons, who make fun of their nationality and are otherwise cordial towards them, until they spot the pentagram on the wall of the pub. The room's aura shifts from uplifting to menacing at the drop of a hat. The pubgoers warn the pair to keep on the road while traveling at night and be wary of the full moon. David and Jack inadvertently veer off course and are viciously attacked by an unseen entity that kills Jack and injures David. After waking up from a coma 3 weeks later, David is visited by the undead Jack, who tells him that he's turning into a lycanthrope, or a werewolf. Jack insists that David kill himself, as that is the only way to free his soul from the mortal world, and stop David from giving others a similar fate. David ignores Jack, however, and succumbs to his fate. He transforms into a werewolf and murders 6 innocent people on the streets of London. David keeps ignoring Jack's advice and puts his girlfriend Alex's life at severe risk. In the climactic scene of the film, David goes on a rampage and is only stopped with a bullet to the head. The movie ends as we see Alex mourning David over his cold, dead body. Amidst the gore-filled, decapitation-savvy throes of An American Werewolf in London, we find an addictive brand of dry British humor and stereotype-based comedy that happens to live up to its reputation till date. In the opening scene at the Slaughtered Lamb, our protagonists are ridiculed by the patrons for the simple fact that they're Americans, which becomes a subsequent theme for the rest of the film's humor. In the closing stages of the film, we see David hurl obscenities at the Queen, Prince Charles, and Winston Churchill in an attempt to get himself arrested, which is singularly American, employing crafty Yank insults to rile up the Brit police chief. The biggest comic relief of this film also happens to be its most hideous one. Jack's undead spirit is the ideal definition of a crass best friend who breaks down his peers' defenses with unparalleled wit. Jack is David's soul buddy, his supernatural guide, and his laughing medicine in turns. The way he ridicules his paranormal existence, have you ever talked to a corpse? Boring. Reminisces about his mortal enemy, life mocks me in death, and attempts to reconcile David with his fate as his body decays progressively is never going to get old for us. And who can forget the signature British hospitality and sardonic quips directed towards David by the spirits of his victims? Yes, the movie has its fair share of graphic violence. In fact, it's astonishing how polished the production is, given the special effects at the time were still physical. Through love, death, and friendship that lasts beyond the grave, An American Werewolf in London takes the tummy-tickling premise of an American assimilating in British society and masterfully lays it with equal parts horror and trademarked Britain sarcasm. This is the End, 2013. Proof that James Franco's house parties are best avoided. This is the End is a movie that is packed to the brim with R-rated humor, violent deaths, and self-depreciation, the likes of which have never been seen on screen before. Set in a fictionalized version of the real world, every character in this film portrays their real self. This includes Seth Rogen, James Franco, Jonah Hill, Jay Baruchel, and Craig Robinson. They attend a party at James Franco's house in Hollywood, where he's hosting a bunch of A-list celebrities. Seth and Jay arrive, get bored of the party real quick, and head out to the store to get some booze. That is when the world ends, as apocalyptic earthquakes destroy most of Los Angeles, and all hell literally breaks loose. The rest of the movie sees our cast of comics overcome adversities, clear up confusions, and find a way to ascend to heaven quickly, to escape Satan's clutches.
Unbelievable! It's unacceptable after all the coke I've wasted on you people! Throw it away!
This movie is the definition of testosterone-fueled humor. The entire cast gets up to several debauched and questionable activities that play into the idea of the Hollywood lifestyle and the audience's perception of the daily routine of a celebrity. Rogen and Goldberg managed to pull together this car wreck of a movie with sheer charisma. This is the End doesn't have a lot going for it in terms of plot, but it more than makes up for it with its copious amounts of apocalyptic humor and well-timed slapstick comedy. Everything we see in this movie is a parody of real life. Jay Baruchel's exorcism attempt evolves into a hilarious exchange about Christ's compelling capabilities. Seth Rogen's tragic childhood trauma comes full circle. Well, sort of. And Michael Cera somehow manages to steal the entire show with the sheer contrast between his movie self and his real self. The film's epic conclusion is so over the top that you can't help but laugh. Who doesn't picture the Backstreet Boys as heaven's residual muses after all? This is the End is not a serious horror movie. It's not a serious comedy either. It's an improvisational roller coaster of drugs, sex, vulgar jokes, and outrageous premises that will make you crack up despite your better judgment. And that is simply where it shines.
Jean Shorts, isn't he?
Mom, he calls them jorts.
Well, we'll be fine. I mean, I can handle him.
I know, you're the best.
The Babysitter, 2017. What if your hot blonde babysitter was secretly a Satanist and befriends you only to sacrifice you to the devil later? The Babysitter explores that oddly specific possibility. Cole is a meek adolescent boy who gets picked on often and has two friends, his neighbor Melanie and his babysitter B. His parents are outgoing by nature, so they hire a babysitter for him. B quickly develops a strong connection with Cole, who thinks of her as a strong and friendly figure in his life. She teaches him how to stand up for himself by scaring off Jeremy, his bully, and treats him kindly, despite his timid nature. However, he does want to know what B does at his house when his parents are away, so Cole secretly decides to spy on her. Everything seems normal. B and her friends are playing a game of truth or dare. Fairly normal thing to do for teenagers, but things go horribly wrong when B stabs Samuel in the skull and collects his blood for a ritual. Shocked, Cole returns to his room, calls 911 and steels himself for a confrontation with the cultists. What follows is a series of wisecracking interrogations, unfortunate deaths, and immeasurable tension. Things come to an end when Cole confronts B at the end, having dealt with her occult buddies. He crashes Melanie's dad's car into his own home after setting B's power source on fire. They share a heartfelt farewell, where they acknowledge each other's pain before B seemingly passes away. The movie ends with Cole telling his parents that he doesn't need a babysitter anymore, and a firefighter goes through his wrecked house, gets attacked by B. The Babysitter is a sass-filled teenage comedy, a Home Alone tribute film, and a genuine attempt at horror that has some pretty good scares peppered in throughout the plot. The Home Alone parallels are especially clear, with the way Cole runs through the cult members like a piece of cake, with blood and brains. And despite its fairly common premise, the movie manages to spin horror tropes and makes use of them as part of an actual comedy. The way the characters interact with each other is the source of its hilarity. Upon being abducted by the cultists, Cole's first question is why Max is shirtless. Later on, as he's trying to escape from B's crew, Max actually hypes Cole up after the kid's moxie impresses him, encouraging him to keep fighting. He then proceeds to try to kill him, but ends up hanging himself. It's instances of accidental death like this that make The Babysitter gut-clenching in more ways than one. Its humor is decidedly millennial, we'll admit that. Just go back to Allison's rant about getting shot in the boob. But that works in its favor. It's a genre saturated by the same trope being recycled time and time again. But The Babysitter feels fresh, and for that alone, it is worth a watch. Return of the Living Dead, 1985. If we had to sum up this movie in one word, it'd be brains. Return of the Living Dead opens with Foreman Frank showing off US military equipment to his subordinate Freddy. In the process of doing so, he unleashes a toxic gas in the tank that melts the body inside and reanimates a corpse in the meat locker. Their boss Bert arrives and takes charge of the situation, incinerating the corpse and inadvertently spreading the gas that reanimates more corpses. Freddy's girlfriend Tina comes to meet him at his workplace with his friends Spider, Trash, Chuck, Casey, Scuzz, and Suicide. As they hang out at the cemetery, Tina accidentally stumbles across a zombie, and the cat and mouse game begins. The punks trying to get away from the zombies, and the zombies trying to eat their brains. The film's climactic scene sees Bert call the number of the US military drums, only to cause the army to launch a nuclear strike on the city, leveling the entire population, dead or undead. The final shot speaks of an acidic rain falling on the city's remains, which indicates that the zombies are far from done. When Freddy says, "Wait, the movie lied to us?" in the opening scene with the zombie, we knew that we were in for one comedic ride. This movie is iconic for many reasons, but perhaps the one with the most longevity is the personality it gave to zombies. As a direct consequence of this movie, zombies feasting on brains, being able to talk using broken speech, and perform moderate athletic feats became a more prominent feature in future zombie film. For what it's worth, Return of the Living Dead redefined one of horror's most commonly used tropes and deserves your attention for that reason itself. After the movie's release, brains became a legitimate catchphrase for zombies, and besides that, this 80s offering is a hilarious product of its time. Freddy's crew consists of punks, and they are very committed to their lifestyle. You think this is a fucking costume? It's a way of life. From their costume designs to their names, their music choices, and even their spray-painted vehicle, the cast commits to the punk aesthetic of their characters, and it weirdly works. Spider is often the voice of reason and the source of hilarity, which comes as part of his rational outlook on life. I ain't no mood to die tonight. The humor that is generated by this general lack of awareness and naivete of the group is no less rib-tickling, and is perfectly captured in the scene where Freddy tells Tina that he loves her and wants to eat her brains. The film is hokey to the point of extreme, yes. The effects of a nuclear strike aren't nearly as safe as this movie makes them out to be, and Tarman's design is gross enough to make us puke our guts out. But beyond its obviously tropey existence is an earnest comedy that draws you in with its gags, charm, and circumstance.
Some hero.
Teeth, 2007. Dawn O'Keefe is a young conservative girl who is the spokesperson of a Christian abstinence group called The Promise. She lives with her stepdad Bill, her mom Kim, and her sex-crazed stepbrother Brad. Dawn continues to preach and practice abstinence despite Brad's aggressive proclivities, and keeps her purity ring on. All of that changes when she meets Toby. Though she wants to remain chaste until she marries, she can't deny her obvious attraction to him, and often fantasizes about him. Dawn and Toby start hanging out as a group, and soon get close to one another. The pair is unable to resist their physical attraction to one another, and they agree to get intimate. But things go horribly wrong when Dawn becomes uncomfortable in light of her vows. Toby attempts to force himself on her and quickly realizes that that was a horrible decision. Dawn flees the cave after having bit Toby's genitalia off with her other teeth. What follows is a series of psychologically traumatic events that lead to Dawn learning how to protect herself from the violent, self-imposing, immoral men. She deals with her perverted OBGYN, her sleazeball friend Ryan, and finally, her stepbrother Brad, who has a crazed obsession with Dawn. She escapes on a bike and has to hitchhike, and soon discovers that the man's generosity wasn't unconditional. The final shot sees Dawn understanding her situation, analyzing her options, and giving the camera a seductive smile before the screen fades to black. Teeth is, simply put, a deconstruction of the phallic dominance that men have tended to assert on women throughout the course of history. The real horror is the lack of the phallus itself. Vagina dentata is a persisting myth across different world religions: Hinduism, Koshintoism, Maori mythology, and a few others. Teeth takes the myth and brings it to the 21st century, converting it from a curse to a weapon that most women would likely kill to have, and rightly so. Unabashedly feminist in its narrative, Teeth's horror and humor is derived from the unsettling real circumstances that Dawn finds herself in. Throughout the course of the film, she gets assaulted 3 times and misled once. The relatable nature of each encounter is what's truly horrific. Through Dawn's journey, we see the seedly underbelly of the male psyche. Even the doctor in this film couldn't help himself from touching Dawn inappropriately. Funnily enough, The humor generated at the expense of these men feels well deserved. When we see Dawn's incestuous stepbrother trying to take advantage of her, we don't feel sad for him when he loses his penis, and even manage to break into a laugh when Brad's dog eats it in some form of twisted comeuppance. Even Ryan, who we were rooting for in the beginning, shows his true colors and gets what was coming to him, even though we knew all about Dawn's curse at that point. Teeth's humor isn't as cheerful as it is cathartic. The genuine confusion that most of the men experience at Dawn's retaliation is priceless. Some have even argued that Dawn's violent intentions were a bit much, but really, what did you expect from someone who kept finding herself at the short end of the stick with literally every man she met? Teeth is that rare offering that is one thing for a section of the audience, and an entirely different thing for the other. For men, it is a visceral horror that taps into their most primitive fear. For women, it is one of the finest comedies on planet Earth. Jenniferís Body, 2009. The film begins with Needy, an inmate at an asylum, recounting the tale of how she got there. In a flashback, we meet the nerdy and shy Needy watching her hot, popular best friend Jennifer at cheerleading practice. Jen and Needy being as close as they are doesn't make sense, but they're inseparable. One night, Jennifer takes Needy to a concert by a local indie band called Low Shoulder. Unfortunately, a fire breaks out at the venue, and Jennifer disappears into the night with the band. Needy goes back to her place to find Jennifer there, blood-soaked and maniacal, feeding on whole rotisserie chickens and puking up black blood. Needy is terrified, but come the next day, Jennifer looks completely normal and brushes off Needy's suspicions. Meanwhile, Low Shoulder gains popularity for their perceived heroism during the earlier incident at the concert. What follows is a tale of seduction, death, and cannibalism with occult overtones. It is revealed that Jennifer has been transformed into a succubus who seduces men to feed on them in order to satiate the demon that possesses her. Turns out Low Shoulder tried to turn her into a virgin sacrifice, but botched the ritual because they didn't know that Jennifer wasn't actually a virgin. Now the vessel for a demon spirit, Jennifer uses her body to lure unwitting victims to their death, maintain her beauty, and gain godlike powers. Needy confronts her demonic friend, who tries to prey on her boyfriend, and puts an end to Jennifer's life, destroying the demon with it. In the closing moments of the movie, we see Needy acquire some of Jen's powers she uses to escape the asylum and hitch a ride to a band's final show. The credits reveal that all members of Low Shoulder had been brutally murdered.
Hopeless.
Jennifer's Body is perhaps Megan Fox's finest hour in the spotlight, and there's good reason for that. What makes this wacky, esoteric tale about a demonic seductress work is the script. The story reads like a chick flick hopped up on ectoplasm, replete with sarcastic quips, sassy dismissals, and cute yet deadly intentions. We get this sense of grandeur from Needy's first few lines of dialogue. I think I get more letters from Santa Claus, Zac Efron, and Dr. Phil combined. But it is precisely that kind of familiar, catty dialogue work that makes this movie seem almost like a darker, more evil version of Mean Girls, sprinkled with a healthy dusting of Satanism. Speaking of which, the sacrifice scene is a criminally underrated piece of comic timing and unnerving tension. Nikolai's nonchalant admission that Satan was their only hope at fame, because they couldn't be bothered to get on a soundtrack or appear on Letterman, found us struggling to keep our laughs down. Even the supposedly climactic fight scene had insane zingers being flung left, right, and center. Can someone get poor Jen a tampon, please? She's bled enough today. A rapid-fire barrage of one-liners, incredible costume designs, and an inspired performance by Fox really carry this movie. There isn't a single scene where you feel bored by Jenniferís Body. Amidst its gory plotline and high school levels of drama, it manages to tell a nuanced story about female friendship and delivers memorable laughs, all the while scaring the absolute bejesus out of you. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to send a like and subscribe to our channel. For marvelous videos, I'm Rylan. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks for watching.